The international right to repair movement is cutting across industries, from tech to telecom, and most importantly, the auto industry. The CAR Coalition is a group of independent automotive parts and repair companies, associations, and insurers. They're leading the charge on behalf of consumer choice, transparency, and affordability in the auto repair industry. Last year, the coalition launched a major campaign in support of the right to repair movement in key federal legislation, such as the Save Money on Auto Repair Transportation, or the SMART Act, and the Right to Equitable and Professional Auto Industry Repair, the Repair Act. Under current law, the misuse of design patents by manufacturers has drastically increased repair costs for American vehicle owners. LKQ Corporation is a leading provider of alternative vehicle mechanical and collision replacement products, and they're also a member of the coalition. Here to tell us more is LKQ's Ian Musselman. Thank you for joining me today, Ian.
Amanda, thank you so much for having me.
So my first question for you, Ian, is why does the right to repair matter?
Terrific question. First and foremost, we're all consumers. We all purchase products. Most of us drive vehicles. In North America, over 280 million vehicles are on the road today. That's a lot of automobiles.
Yeah.
It is typically the second largest purchase in a consumer's life behind a home. And when we take ownership of that product, we should have the ability to maintain, repair that vehicle when and where and with what parts we choose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So can you kind of break it down a little bit more for us? What's going on here exactly? Is this a new problem or?
Right. Well, the repair industry is one that has existed for well over 100 years, as long as the automotive industry has existed. And I'll tell you a little bit of an anecdote about right to repair and how it's difficult with my own vehicle. I've got a 7-year-old large family truck. I had a left side taillight burnout. I took it to my local mechanic while it was getting an oil change and said, John, do you mind throwing a new bulb into the taillight assembly? And he said, these vehicles, it's no longer a bulb, it's an LED board. So you've got to get an LED board to replace it. I said, great, well, order it, slap it in there. He came back to me and said, well, I can't actually order it. You've got to order it through GM. They won't sell it to me. So I went to my local GM dealer and asked them to order the LED taillight for me so that I could take it back to John so he could install it. And I was informed by the parts department that they could not sell me that LED taillight unless they were the ones to install it. I ended up purchasing an aftermarket taillight assembly for much cheaper that has the same functionality, but I really wanted to keep that same appearance and that just wasn't available. So having the ability to get access to parts to use the garage that you want to use is extremely important to the consumer. It's a way that we keep competition at the status quo that exists today, which also drives down prices. And in today's inflationary economy is extremely important. And I mentioned that this has been an issue for over a decade. Right to repair was litigated in Massachusetts back in 2012, and an MOU, memorandum of understanding, was signed by both the aftermarket industry and original vehicle manufacturers that said you can have access to parts and various repair procedures. But that's now outdated. That doesn't take into consideration the technology and the data transfer that exists in today's vehicles, nor does it take into account the proliferation of design patent applications here in the United States that have been granted to smaller parts, cosmetic parts on vehicles.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, everything is constantly changing, right? I mean, just to keep up with it all. And, I'm familiar with the Right to Repair Act. I have not been as familiar with how patent law is connected to this. So can you explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah, it's extremely nuanced, and this is something that really has not existed in terms of how to keep parts choice out of consumers' ability to make decisions on how to repair the cosmetic features of their vehicle following a collision. But
Okay.
design patents have been around for a while. The intent of a design patent was really to protect the original design of a system. And in the vehicle's case, it would keep Chevy from copying a Ford Mustang or Ford from copying a Corvette. So it was the design of an overall system, and they recoup their intellectual property at point of sale. It wasn't necessarily to protect the design features of a fender or a bumper cover. Not the bumper assembly, but the bumper cover. So the external appearance of a vehicle and part by part, those pieces of a vehicle, the opportunity for a consumer to decide when they're replacing a fender, they should be able to decide to choose a Ford fender as an example, or an aftermarket third-party fender that is of similar quality and restores the vehicle to its original appearance post-collision.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. So then, that's sort of the issue, but what about the solve for this? How do we solve this problem?
So, the Federal Trade Commission here in the US recently released a report called Nix the Fix report. And what they identified in the automotive industry is the growing lack of choice for the consumers on how to fix their vehicles. And what they pointed out was two issues. One, it's the increasing lack of access to data that's being transmitted telematically. And second, it was the proliferation of design patents in the collision repair market. And what they stated was there was a need for Congress to legislate or pass new law that might amend current design patent law. So tweaking some language here and there that allows for competition in the parts market. And that is really what the SMART Act does. And then similarly in the design, in the data transmission or data access issue, that's the Repair Act that you mentioned earlier. That would solve and allow the FTC to enforce law that allows for competition in the repair market and access to consumers, and quite frankly, protect small businesses that exist in the independent repair world.
Yes, absolutely, which is very important. That's many of our listeners and our viewers, so that's great. Can you tell me a little bit more about the Car Coalition's National Right to Repair campaign?
Absolutely. If you look at the aftermarket industry, beyond just distributors, you've got all of the independent service market and the OEM service market, quite frankly. They all use parts, whether they're OEM or alternative parts manufacturing. And then additionally, you've got insurance groups, you've got your retailers that sell alternative parts as well as OEM parts. It is a thriving and extremely large industry. And so the Car Coalition is all of these pieces of a very large industry have come together to really advocate for change. And when I say change, they're advocating for the status quo that has existed for the last 100 years, protecting the consumer's right to choose where to get their vehicles fixed and with what parts.
Yeah. And so the big question I have is, how can we get involved? The listener, the viewer, the reader, what can they do to support the legislation?
That's a terrific question, because we hear that all the time from legislators is, what do the consumers think about this? What are those small businesses back at home? What are their opinions? And often they don't have the ability or know how to come to Washington and speak to members of Congress who are working on these policy changes. So what they can do is go to the CAR Coalition website, which is simply carcoalition.org, and
Okay.
sign up. There's a couple buttons that they hit. Maybe enter their zip code. It'll get their, what will pop up is their member of Congress's contact information. They can digitally sign a letter that goes directly to that member of Congress that says, fight for our rights. Ensure that we have the right to choose. It's really only about 3 clicks of time and, maybe 5 minutes out of your day to become a part of the movement.
Right, and so worth it. And what about the support you've seen so far? Are people generally, getting out there and supporting this and they're in favor of it, or what are you hearing and seeing?
Well, what we're seeing is 2 years ago in November of 2020, there was a ballot initiative that was introduced in the state of Massachusetts that said, please amend the existing MOU on right to repair, include updates such as over-the-air data transmission. Make that data available to independent service centers. Allow the consumer to choose who works on their vehicles. And that passed overwhelmingly 75 to 25%. On a federal level, we've seen national polling, right to repair, and specifically around repair and maintenance, overwhelmingly favored 80%. Only 5% of folks have said, you know what, we want the OEMs to control. 80% have said we, the consumer, want to control where our vehicles get repaired and by whom.
Well, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, that's for sure. Thank you so much, Ian. That was great, very informative. And, I really think that our viewers will be moved to take action as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
Amanda, thank you for this wonderful opportunity. And really, I encourage you to visit carcoalition.org and get involved in this really important policy initiative.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.